Hey everyone, thank you for following along as we continue our road to baby Thomas. The last time we spoke, we had decided that we're going to go with IVF because our last 3 IUIs did not work. So today we're going to go through the whole process of IVF. I brought my notebook with me just because there's certain things that I don't remember off the top of my head, and I prefer to just, double check certain things instead of saying the wrong stuff. What I will say to you is that when you have IVF, like I didn't know much about IVF, but when I heard about IVF seemed like a sure thing. And I think that was one of the misconceptions I had where IVF was concerned. I felt like, okay, once you did IVF, you were guaranteed a child. And, going through this process, there's so many things that I learned that I didn't even know was a part of it, and just made me look at it differently. So we started our IVF process on November 28th. So I got my period, and they usually say, okay, day 1 of your period, you're gonna call in and we'll schedule for baseline. So baseline is where they take my blood, they check my hormone levels. Not only that, they do an ultrasound just to check to make sure everything's good and we're good to go. I get a list of instructions through my clinic's portal to say what injections I have to take on what days and what times I have to take these injections. Funny enough, before I started IVF, I was terrified of needles, terrified of blood draws, but I guess when you're in a situation where you have no choice, you do what you gotta do. So each night I would go through and I would have my list of medications that I would have to take. I had no problems injecting them. I would have to inject them into my stomach, close to around my belly button. And that was fine. The only one that gave me a little problem was the Menopur because it burned going in. But after having several conversations with other people, they said this was normal. Now, with the IVF process, is a lot more monitoring. So I started, let's say on the 28th, and then 2 days later, I had an appointment. This is where they drew blood and they did an ultrasound. They wanted to check my hormone levels. They wanted to check how the follicles were growing. So basically the medications that I was injecting into my body was helping me to produce more follicles. So for me, with blood draw, I have really small veins and there's always an issue. So whenever they had to give blood, this is where I was sending them. But it got to the point that I was having so many blood draws that I didn't even know what part of my body to use. So every other day, so I'll say the second day we would go, they would do my levels, and then they would call me with instructions. They may say, increase your dosage, decrease this dosage. Maybe it's growing too fast or it's growing too small. And then I would come back 2 days later and then we would go at it again. As we got close to the follicles getting really big, it would turn from every 2 days to every single day. So every single day I would be getting monitored and I would have to switch up or add medications depending on where we were in the process. I think my first IVF, I probably had to stim. So basically injecting myself, I want to say 12 to 14 days. Don't quote me. But I think it was 12 to 14 days. And then once it got to the size that they wanted, because they don't want the follicles too big, and then you don't want them too small that once they retrieve them, there are no eggs. And then so they would call me the night before and they would say, okay, the doctor wants you to trigger. So this is where I would inject myself with HCG once again, in my stomach, and this would bring on ovulation. Now, what I will say is the very next day you have to go in, they'll give you a time that you're going to a clinic because you're going to have an egg retrieval. I will say I had a lot of pains just because there were so many follicles and, triggering ovulation. I was just a mess. Let's just say that. So the morning of, they give you a time that you have to be at the clinic. My husband has to produce another sample at home, which we take, and they will then wash it and clean it and do what they need to do. And then I will come in. Now, before we went in, the doctor said to me, you had 24 follicles, 16 on the right, 8 on the left. And I was super excited because here I'm like, okay, 24 follicles means I'll get 24 eggs and maybe 24 embryos. And once again, I really didn't know the process. I mean, I say that now because it's like they give you so much information when you're learning about it that sometimes you hear some and you miss some, and it's only when you're in the middle of it you really understand. So I was excited going in. I was like, 24 follicles, this is good. This is good. So we get to the clinic. Now, the only time my husband was able to accompany me at the clinic was egg retrieval or if they were doing embryo transfer. Because of COVID, he was not allowed at any of my other appointments, so everything I had to go in on my own. So for the egg retrieval, we went to the clinic, we went inside, and then, I'll put on the gown. The doctor will come in and say, we're gonna try to retrieve as much eggs as we can. I meet with anesthesia, have a conversation. So my biggest thing is I hate going under. As many surgeries as I've had, I hate anesthesia. So for me, it was just like calming myself because I was just like super nervous with that process. So then I remember being taken into the room and I was talking with the anesthesiologist and he injected me. That was the last thing I knew. Next thing I woke up and I had water and I had crackers because prior to that, you're not allowed to eat anything after midnight. So I had not eaten. So they gave me something to eat. The whole process of the egg retrieval takes about 15 to 30 minutes, depending on how complicated of a situation it is. And then it took me about maybe a half an hour of recovery before, they let me go. Sorry about that. For some reason, I got disconnected. So anyways, so the doctor came in and they said to me they were able to retrieve 11 eggs on the right. Apparently, I had a blood vessel blocking the left side, so they were not able to get any of the eggs. And I was hurt because there was 8 on that side. I'm like, darn it. Now I missed out on 8. I have 11. I mean, it's better than nothing, but I was really hurt. Anyways, at that point, the instruction was to make sure that I'm drinking a lot of electrolytes, that I'm eating high sodium food, high proteins, because they wanted to prevent ovarian hyperstimulation. The doctor wanted to do a fresh transfer. So when transferring an embryo, you can do a fresh transfer or a frozen transfer. A fresh transfer is when they do a transfer of the embryo within 3 to 5 days of the egg retrieval. A frozen transfer is when you have an embryo on ice and then they thaw it and then they will insert it into your transfer into your uterus. In this case, they wanted to do a fresh transfer, a 5-day fresh transfer, depending on how many embryos made it. So at that point, they said, okay, we're going to have you start doing progesterone shots to make sure that your lining is pretty good so that once we, transfer the embryo, that it will attach, no issues. Now, I went home and I was in a lot of pain. A lot of pain. I felt like someone rearranged my insides. I felt like there was gas stuck that would not move. Like I was uncomfortable. And I knew they said, the first day or so might be brutal, but I did not feel like myself for a whole week. The first day I stayed in bed, I tried to eat as much as I can, but I was so out of it. And it just hurt to move a lot. That same night I had to start progesterone shots since we were going to do the 5-day transfer. Out of all my shots, I will say the progesterone in oil hurts the most. So this one I had to give this one to myself in the muscle in my butt. And it's thick. It's really thick because it's oil. And so what I would do is inject the oil into my butt, and then I would use a roller to kind of massage the area to not make sure there were no knots. And then I would use a heating pad to kind of just break up the oil. Like, that was really painful. So out of all the shots that I took, that was really painful. So I had to do that, leading up to the transfer. Now, they retrieved 11 eggs. Out of the 11 eggs, 9 were matured. From there, 8 were fertilized. So basically, they injected my husband's sperm into the eggs, and then they were fertilized. Now, even though we had 8 that fertilized, now the wait begins. So it's a process to see how many will actually make it, or how many of the embryos will actually make it to be, whether to be transferred or whether frozen, or if it was a case that we're going to do further testing. So on day 3, they would call in. They said, okay, out of the 8, this amount made it. By day 5, we had 5 out of the 8 that were still fighting. So 3 of them fell off, didn't make it, so we had 5. So we went in on the 5th day to do the transfer. So they'll call you, they tell you what time you need to show up. They say, make sure you don't wear any perfume, any cologne, anything of that sort once you're doing the transfer, and to come with a full bladder, which once again is the hardest thing for me to do. But anyways, I showed up with a full bladder. What they do is they have different times. So they'll bring me in the back, and what they'll do is they'll do an ultrasound to check to see that my bladder is as full as they need it to be. And they'll also keep the ultrasound on, because what they're doing is my doctor will come and he'll show me the embryo that they're going to transfer. They're going to put in the catheter, and then they're going to put the embryo inside of me. So while they're putting the embryo inside, I can see it because I'm watching it on the screen, because they're making sure that, it's going to where it needs to be, that it will stick. One of the things that they do is, once they finish with the embryo, they do give you one of these. So you can't really see it if you can, but it's the embryo that they transferred, so that, you just have a picture of it, you have it with you. So we did the transfer, and so at this point, I'm pregnant until proven otherwise. And so we leave and we go home. But before we go home, they have this superstitious thing where you are supposed to eat McDonald's fries once you're done from a retrieval, because something with the salt, I don't know, but I love McDonald's fries, so anything to eat it. So we did that. I came home, I rested, that particular day. I took it easy. I made sure I was eating healthy, just different little things that they said to do, or like I read up online, I was doing, drinking bone broth, like you name it, I was doing it, because at this point, anything I needed to do to help it stick. And so I was happy, because for me, it was like, okay, I'm pregnant. As of right now, I'm pregnant. And the way everything happened, I was like, okay, by the time they do the pregnancy test, it's close to Christmas, maybe I can give that to my husband for a Christmas gift. Like, my mind starts going all over the place, because I'm thinking IVF, this is a done deal. So anyways, the first week goes by, and I said, you know what, I'm not going to test, because I know whenever I start testing, I get into this crazy frenzy that I need to test every 2 seconds, every day, and it just drives me crazy. So I said, I'm not going to test. So I did good. And then 2 days before I was scheduled to go for my pregnancy test, I said, I'm going to test. I'm going to test because I just want to know. So I did one of the cheapy tests from Walmart, and I didn't see a second line. I'm like, we'll try one of those clear blue ones that says pregnant. I don't have to think about it, whatever. So it came up and it said not pregnant. So I think at that point, I kind of sort of lost it a little. I remember my husband came in and I said, the test, I'm not pregnant. And he said, why would you test? I thought you were going to wait. Why would you do this to yourself? I said, no, I needed to know beforehand what it was. So he said, you know what? Maybe it's too soon. It won't show up. It'll show up on the blood. So, on the blood test, let's just wait. So I said, okay. And I felt a way because, I don't know, there's something inside of me told me I wasn't pregnant, but I was just like, I'm not going to hold on to that. I'm just going to be positive and go from there. The next day I tested again. I didn't tell him, but I tested and it was negative. And I remember I was sitting at my computer because I work from home. I was sitting at my computer and he came in to ask me something and he said, what's wrong? And it's crazy because I think about it now and it just makes me want to cry, but I'm not going to cry. I said to him, I can't do this. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I feel like I'm getting into a space that I don't know myself. I said, if this really isn't the case, I'm gonna spiral into a state of depression that I can't get out of. And he looked at me and he said, what? I said, nothing. So anyways, we went and we did the blood test and they called and they said, it's negative. And at that point, I just started crying. I just started crying because I said to myself, this is IVF. This is supposed to be a sure thing. And I said to my husband, I said, I can't do this. I can't do this. I don't want to go on anymore. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, I don't know. I said, I'm having this feeling that I've never had, and I don't know what I can say, what you can say, what we can do to get out of it, but I'm done. And when I tell you, I cried. And it's crazy because I felt like I was spiraling, but I did not want to, show it or worry anyone around me. Because remember, most people didn't know I was going through this. And I said to him, I said, I don't want to do this. I can't do this anymore. I said, I can't do this. And he said, I don't know what you need to do or what I need to do, but you need to tell me because I can't lose you. He said that. And I said, I don't want to talk. And I think for about 2 weeks, I was just in my own world. I was going through emotions. I would cry every night. I would cry every day. And I felt like a failure. A failure because I felt like I'm supposed to be able to carry a kid. I'm supposed to be able to carry a child. Why is this so hard? Why is my body failing me? But I think this hurt more because it's IVF. You spend all this money, you do all these tests, all these injections, and what do you have to show for it? Nothing. And I just wish going in, I knew that it was not a definite, and I probably would have managed my expectations differently. Would I have been upset? Of course, I'm human, but I feel like I would have managed it differently. I went into a state of depression that I did not know myself. And it got so hard to mask it that I just didn't want to be around anyone. I was happy that I worked from home. I didn't have to see anyone. I didn't have to pretend. And I felt like I just kept going further and further into a dark place. My doctor called and she said, I'm not sure what happened, but we need to have a consult. So I set up my WTF consult, like what the hell happened. So stay tuned. Next week I will definitely tell you about that appointment. But yeah, my first round of IVF was a no.